Good morning. When we were on our little trip in September, we listened to some different places for Bible studies and things. And I heard a lesson about uh, the demon-possessed man and the pigs. And I thought, well, that was pretty good. So I thought that's what I was going to do. So that's what I'm going to do. This lesson is found in three different locations: Matthew 8:28 through 34, Mark 5, 1 through 20, and Luke 8:26 through 39. And I chose the longest one because it gives the most detail. But there are some facts in the others that Mark does not mention. And there are a little bit of differences, but we'll talk about that. So Mark 5, verse 1. Then they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gadarenes. And when he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one could bind him, not even the chains. I forgot to hit that. Because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces, neither could anyone tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshipped him. Some versions say fell down before him. And he cried out with a loud voice and said, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the God, Most High God? I implore you by God that you do not torment me." For he said to him, "Come out of the man, unclean spirit." Then he asked him, "What is your name?" And he answered, saying, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Also he begged him earnestly that he would not send them out into the country, out of the country. Now a large herd of swine was feeding there near the mountains. So all the demons begged him, saying, "Send us to the swine, that we may enter them." And at once Jesus gave them permission. Then the unclean spirits went out and entered the swine. There were about 2,000. And the herd ran violently down the steep place into the sea and drowned in the sea. So those who fed the swine fled, and they told it in the city and in the country. And they went out to see what it was that had happened. Then they came to Jesus and saw the one who had been demon possessed and had the legion sitting and clothed in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who saw it told them how it happened to him who had been demon possessed and about the swine. Then they began to plead with him to depart from their region. And when he got into the boat, he who had been demon possessed begged him that he might be with him. However, Jesus did not permit him, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them what great things the Lord has done for you, and how he has had compassion on you." And he departed and began to proclaim in Decapolis all that Jesus had done for him, and all marveled. The area that Jesus was in at this time was he had crossed the sea here into this area. This is Decapolis. That is an area of rule that was divided up from the time of Herod, and they had the different divisions. But these two towns here, one is mentioned in one source and the other in the other of the Gadarenes. This is the area that he had come across. So he'd come across the sea to this area. So what happened? He encountered a man. Matthew's version says two men. So why does Matthew mention two, but the others only mention the one? Maybe Mark felt like the story of the one was more important to where he was going. He had more problems. I don't know. But that's what he does. So when we look at what this man who is possessed by the demons, what do we see? We see that he was isolated. Some of the versions talk about that he was naked. Later in Mark, it says when he was sitting there, he was clothed. But this man was living in horrible conditions. He was outside of the town, and he was living in the caves among the dead. The Jews could not come in contact with a dead body. If they did, they became unclean. So this man was living in an unclean state constantly. He was out away from everything. The people could not even come near him. In Matthew 8, verse 28, it says, when he had come to the other side of the country, the Gerasenes, there met him 2 demon-possessed men coming out of the tombs, exceedingly fierce, so that no one could pass that way. People couldn't even get near him. He was so just full of rage and anger, and they would try to do things to tame him, to get him to settle down, but they could not do it. This man was controlled by the demons. Man couldn't control him. And it says he couldn't be held by chains. So I looked on the internet, so you know this is going to be true. These were some chains that were found about that time, Roman chains. And this, to me, doesn't look all that big a deal. I mean, but it's old, it's rusty. But they're not real thick like what we might think of a chain. But obviously it worked, or they wouldn't keep doing it. But these chains could not hold this man. He would just tear them apart. And so he was just so full of this energy and rage coming from these demons. And he was tormented. Was he in pain? You know, you think about the fact that he was yelling, it said night and day, in the mountains, in the tombs, everywhere around there. And he says he was cutting himself. And I've read that, you know, sometimes people who are tormented within themselves, they will cut themselves, and it would give a different kind of pain, but it relieves that mental pain. Maybe that's what he was doing, trying to get out of that. I don't know. But he would yell and cut himself and maybe trying to get relief. But when the demons saw Jesus, you know, they recognized him. He says he ran and fell down before him. When the version in Mark said they worshiped him. I don't think that's what it meant, though. I think they fell down. They realized who he was. Mark, let's see where I am. They know who Jesus is. In Mark 5:7, so he cried out with a loud voice and said, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God that you do not torment me." So they knew who Jesus was. They were actually testifying who Jesus was. And in James 2, verse 19, it says, "You believe that there is one God, you do well. Even the demons believe and tremble." I think when they bowed down before him, they had concern about what was going to happen to them. One version said, torment us before, and another one says, before our time. The demons knew who were in control. Matthew 8:29 says, and suddenly they cried out saying, "What have we to do with you, Jesus, you Son of God? You have come here to torment us before the time." I think that's a little ironic that here they were doing to this man the torment that they were given, the pain that he was feeling, the isolation, just everything that he was going through. And now they're worried about, you're going to come torment us. It just seems kind of ironic, I think. But there is a time, went too far. Kind of got out of whack here. There is a time for the devil and his angels to be judged, and there is a place where they are bound. In Jude 1, verse 6, and the angel who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he has reserved everlasting change under darkness for the judgment of that great day. There was a time when angels revolted from God, and he has put them in a place until that time of judgment. Now, we had a good lesson from Jordan when he went through the things on demons, and I'm not going to go through all that, but I believe this was a time that some of these demons were allowed to come out of that because of Jesus and the disciples and the apostles, that they could show their power over Satan. There is a time coming for them, and the fear that these demons have was that he was going to give that judgment now, and they knew what that judgment was going to be. It would be an everlasting torment for them too. So we have Jesus, when he sees them, he questions them, and he says, what is your name? That's kind of an odd thing, but we see that angels have names. But he says we're legion because we're many. Now, the Roman legion, depending on what you look at, and when you see it on the internet, they've all got to be right, so they're all right? It's anywhere from 3,800 to 6,000. Now, were there 3,800 to 6,000 demons in him? I don't know. It just says because we're many. There were multiples. It wasn't just possession by one demon. There were a bunch of them. And we see that Jesus has command over them. Jesus has cast out demons almost right from the beginning of his ministry. He even gave power to the apostles when they sent them that they could cast out demons. And in most of these times, he doesn't allow them to talk. He tells them, you can't testify who I am. Now, most times it's already happened, but it's not to go any further. This time was the same, but he is talking with these demons. How was this happening? Were they just speaking out? Were they speaking through the man? I don't know. But at one point it says they all asked. So it's like multiple voices coming out. So they were in this area across the sea, and it says it was on a big hill, and there were cliffs. So this is one picture of an area right across in this area. And there's a pretty steep hill, and you can see the rocky areas. But this is another picture I found, and I don't know how far this is from the first one, but this is almost like cliffs. But you can see it's all rocks. And they said that the tombs, a lot of times they would, it was a sandstone type rock, and they would carve out tombs in it, and they would use caves in these rocks as tombs. So this is the area that they were in. And they had made a request to go into the pigs. Why? What was the purpose of them going into the pigs? And you think, well, what happened to the pigs? They ran down and drowned. Well, it didn't kill the spirits. It didn't kill the demons. They're spiritual beings. They weren't going to drown with the pigs. So what was going to happen? Well, are the demons ever going to do anything that's going to be good? It's going to cause problems. Why did Jesus allow this? We don't know. But he did grant this. But what it happened to them after, we don't know either. But they could have been sent out of the country like they didn't want to be, or they could have been put on back into the abyss where they were to be bound. We don't know because we're not told. But they didn't just stay there. Something happened. They went away. So why did he allow this? We don't know. The results of this was, well, Harold. I'm locked up. The demons got me. Did something come up? Okay. So what are the results of this encounter? First of all, the demons are gone. The man is freed from his torment. In Mark 5:15 says, and they came to Jesus and saw the one who had been demon possessed and had the legion sitting and clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. So the demons were gone. The part where it says they were afraid, one version or translation says they had great fear. So the man was freed from this problem that he had had for some time. It said, for the people, they came and they feared. Now, what were they afraid of? Were they afraid of Jesus for what he did or what they were able to do? Or were they afraid of the Romans? Were they afraid of the people who had the herd of pigs? I'm not really for sure, but why were the pigs there? You know, I showed you on the map that this was an area of Roman rule. Well, Romans didn't consider pork to be unclean to them. And they had Roman garrisons there. They had the Roman officers there. They had the rulers there. And there were areas around it. So this was probably a food source for the Romans. Why else would there be 2,000 in a herd in a Jewish territory? So it was not for them, it was for someone else. Now, you take out 2,000 hogs, you've taken out a good bit of lunch. So maybe the people feared what would happen to them because of this loss. But whatever it was, they were afraid. And in that fear, they asked Jesus to leave. They didn't want him to be there. What happened with the man? Well, he had a request. In Mark 5:18, he says he wants to follow Jesus. And then he got into the boat. When he had gotten into the boat, that's Jesus, he who had been demon possessed begged him that he might be with him. He wanted to follow Jesus. But Jesus had something else in mind. He had other plans. So in Mark 5:19, he says Jesus did not permit him, but he said, go to your friends and tell them the great things the Lord has done for you. And now he has had compassion on you. In verse 20, and he departed and began to proclaim in Decapolis and all that Jesus had done for him, and all marveled. You know, a lot of times when Jesus healed or did something, what was the instruction? Don't say anything at this time. Even later after this, there were times that he would heal someone and he'd say, don't say anything at this time. But that's not what he told this man. He told him, he said, you go and you tell your friends and you tell your family what the Lord has done for you. Now, I don't know how many other people were seeing this and great, but the majority were wanting Jesus out of there. You need to leave. We don't need you in this area. But this man did that. And in Mark, go over to Mark 7, in verse starting in 31, he says, "And again, departing from the region of Tyre and Sidon, he," that's Jesus, "came through the midst of the region of the Decapolis to the Sea of Galilee." When he had gone up to Tyre and Sidon, he walked down and he came back down to this area. Now, this is the first time that we were seeing here that he had been back to this area. It says, "Then they brought to him one who was deaf and had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to put his hand on him. And he, Jesus, took him aside from the multitude." It wasn't just a few people. "The multitude, and put his fingers in his ears and spat and touched his tongue. Then he looked up to heaven, he sighed and said, Empatha, that is, be open. Immediately his ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue was loosed, and he spake plainly. Then he commanded them that they should not tell no one." Here again, this is that instruction. "But the more he commanded them, the more widely they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, He has done all these things well. He makes both the deaf to hear and the mute to speak." In those days, the multitude being very great and having nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples. This is in the 8th chapter, verse 1. And Jesus said in verse 2, "I have compassion on the multitude because they have now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat." And that's when Jesus feeds the 4,000. I think the man spread the word of what Jesus could do and what he was. Now, we don't know all that was happening when Jesus was sitting there talking to that man. But he was sitting there in his right mind, clothed, listening to the Lord. And then he receives instruction, "Go tell your friends what the Lord has done for you." The next time back, we have a multitude. This man, I think, went and told exactly what he was supposed to do. So what can we learn from this little story that we've heard about since we were in the little classes? I think during Vacation Bible School had a lessons on this. So what can we learn? We can learn that sin or evil is from Satan, and we can see from the way it affected the man, and it can affect us. First, we can see that it can isolate. What happened with the man possessed with the demon? He was isolated from everyone, those that loved him, those that might have cared for him. Evidently, they tried to restrain him because he says nobody could tame him. They were trying to help the man, could not be helped. But I'm sure that's not where he wanted to be. He was in the caves. He was in with the dead. He was not where he wanted to be. And I can't remember who it was that used to say, "Sin will take us where we don't want to go." In this case, evil had taken him where he didn't want to be. And it can do the same thing for us. It can isolate us. If we become full of sin, we can isolate us from family and friends. It can cause those separations. It can cause the separation from our brethren. But most of all, it causes separation from God. It isolates us from him. And in that, it can cause our behavior to change. This man was not this way until he became possessed. Because when the demons left, it says he was in his right mind. He was back to what he should be. Sin can cause us to act in ways that we don't want to act. It can cause us to get into situations where we may steal or we may lie. We may break laws to cover things that we have done. But most of all, it's turning us against God. It's causing us to act in ways. So here again, sin can take us to do things that we don't want to do. It caused this man to act in ways he didn't want to act. Sin can cause us to act in ways that we should not be acting. And it can cause harm. It was where the people couldn't even pass by him. And evidently, people had tried and did not fare very well from the passing by, so they learned to avoid that area. He caused harm to himself in the cuttings. He was just, I would think, just in a miserable state. And that can be the same with us. It can cause us, when we're in a sinful state, to be emotionally damaged. It can cause us to be physically harmed. When people get involved in drinking and drugs, in behavior that is not fitting, it can cause physical problems. And it can cause physical problems that will last for a lifetime. It can cause physical problems for other people when someone has a wreck driving drunk. It can cause people to die. But again, most harm it's a spiritual harm to our souls. It separates us from God. The demons, or Satan, they never do anything that is good for mankind. Satan has never done anything that was good for mankind. In the chapter before this chapter in Mark, Jesus starts teaching in parables. And one of the parables is the parable of the sower. And when he's explaining to the disciples what he was talking about, in chapter 4, verse 15, he said, "And these are the ones by the wayside where the word is sown. When they hear it, Satan comes immediately and takes it away, the word that was sown in their hearts." Satan is not working for the good of people. He even is taking God's word and he'll either twist it or just remove it so it's not in their hearts any longer. He's working against man. But we can look at what Jesus does for mankind. Everything that God and Jesus does is for the benefit of man. A lot of times people may not see it, as like kids when we were punished and they said, "We're doing this for your own good and this hurts me more than it does you." I never believed it. I told my dad I never believed that later. I didn't at the time. But there are times that we might think that, but God, when he reprimands us for doing wrong, is trying to get us to do what is right. And so he's always doing what is right. For the man, he removed the demons. He cast them out. He returned this man to where he was a reasonable person. What does he can do? And that brought peace to this man. John in chapter 1, verse 29, he's talking about John the Baptist. After he had baptized Jesus, John saw Jesus coming toward him the next day and said, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." It's only Jesus who can take away the sin of the world. It's Jesus that removed this evil from this man. And with that, he brought him peace. In Mark 4, verse 38, starting, it says, "But he was in the stern of and this is again the day before he gets there. He was in the stern asleep on a pillow, and they awoke him and said, 'Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?' It was night. There was a storm had come up on the Sea of Galilee. And then Jesus said, then he arose and rebuked the wind and said, 'Peace, be still.' And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said to them, 'Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith?' And they feared exceedingly and said to one another, 'Who can this be that even the wind and the sea obey him?'" We'd seen several times in Mark, they would marvel at, who is this man that he can forgive sins? Or who is this man that he can heal these people? Who is this man that he has control over nature? that he can cause peace to come upon the sea. And they were fearful for that. But Jesus is the one who can do that. He's the one who brought peace to the man. In Mark 5:15, and when they came to Jesus, they saw the one who had been demon possessed and had the legion sitting, clothed, and in his right mind, and they were afraid. He was at peace. Very peaceful, considering where he had come from just probably minutes before. But what about us? In Colossians 3:15, it says, "Let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to which also you were called in one body, and be thankful." When Ryan was doing the Lord's Supper, I started counting how many times you said peace. And what is it that we were talking about in the Lord's Supper? The sacrifice of the Lord is what can bring peace to our souls. It can bring us peace. In Acts 10:36, the word which God sent to his children of Israel, preaching peace through Jesus Christ. He is the Lord of all. The peace that comes from Jesus, from the Father, is that can reconcile us to him, and is that gets sin from our lives. You know, there are about 88 different verses in the New Testament that talk about the peace of God or the peace of Jesus. And when you look at what it can do to change the life, what it did to change that man, that peace that came upon him, it can do the same thing for us. It can get sin from our lives. We can have that reconciliation with God. It can put a peace, a rest to us. And Jesus is the only one who can do this. He's the only one that can give us that kind of peace and that kind of hope of eternal life, and it's through him. And how is that possible? Because of what he has done. When John said, "Behold the Lamb of God," what was he talking about? He was talking about something that was going to happen in almost 3 years. He was going to be God's perfect sacrifice, that through the shedding of his blood, we might have that hope, that we might have that peace. That only comes through the blood of Christ. That only comes through the sacrifice of Christ. That only comes when we come in contact with the blood of Christ. And that only comes through baptism and being obedient. Jesus is calling. He's always calling those who are in sin. He's calling those who are away from him to come back to him. It says that God would that all men everywhere would be saved. We know that's not going to be the case, but he still wants that to be the case. But what you have to do is you have to answer the call. If you need to answer that call today, come as we stand and sing.
Have you a heart that's willing?